In this video, I'm going to show you how to get Emudeck up and running on a Steam Deck with optional plugin support. The Steam Deck is a fun little handheld PC with tons of capabilities for playing modern games as well as retro emulation, all the way up to PlayStation 3, though don't expect that last one to be super perfect considering the emulator isn't as developed as other ones, as well as just requiring a lot of power. But regardless of the point, the Steam Deck is just a portable powerhouse and one that has been a ton of fun to mess with, and today I'm going to show you how to get Emudeck set up on it as well as optional plugin support. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now to get started, you need to have a Steam Deck, of course, and I recommend getting a micro SD card to put into your Steam Deck so that way you aren't wasting your internal drive space, because users of the basic 64 gig one won't have a lot of space left over. And if you want to have a bunch of modern games as well as your retro games, hey, that's a great reason to have it. So as an example, I already have 300 gigs of ROMs put on this SD card just so we don't have to wait on transfer times, and you can see that it is just taking up a good chunk of space. We're going to start with some optional steps here to get plugins up and running. Again, this is optional. You could skip over this entire section and just go straight to Emudeck if you don't want plugin support, but I do recommend it because it lets you manually control core counts in Dolphin and Yuzu, which helps improve the performance in those cores. So the first thing to do is to press your Steam button and go to Settings, and then go down to System and enable Developer Mode. And then from here, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we need to enable CEF Remote Debugging. And it'll ask you to restart your Steam Deck, so yeah, go ahead and restart it. And once your Steam Deck has finished rebooting, either hold down your power button to access the power menu here, or you can press your Steam button and go down to the power option, and switch over to desktop mode. And after your Steam Deck has booted into desktop mode, just navigate down here to your taskbar and open up your system settings, because we need to set a user password if you haven't done so already. So click on the Users tab, and you'll see that you have your Steam Deck username, account type. So just click on Change Password and type in a password of your choice. You can press Steam plus X to bring up the virtual keyboard, and you can just go ahead and type one out. And then it will ask you if you want to change your wallet password. You can choose to do that if you want to, not mandatory. But once that password has been changed, you can just go ahead and close out of the user settings, open up Firefox. And then in the search bar, no, let's just make this bigger, why not? Just do a search for Steam Deck plugins. And I'll put a link in the description below in the video for links to all these sites. I like how I didn't put an M in there, that's awesome. But yeah, so the GitHub for Steam Deck plugin loader, right here. So just scroll down, and you'll see an installation step here. And we just need to copy the code here, go to our start menu here, go to System, open up a console, and then paste it in. And this is all a lot easier if you have an actual keyboard hooked up, but I'm just doing it bare bones Steam Deck for demonstration purposes. But now it's going to ask you to insert that password you just created, so open up your keyboard or type it in on your keyboard if you have one hooked up. And once that has finished, you can close out of the console for now. And if you click on your Dolphin file manager, you'll see you have a new homebrew folder within your just home menu here. And this is where we can now place plugins and other things to modify the way our Steam Deck runs. And this will be important as we install Emudeck. Go back into Firefox, go to your search bar, and type in emudeck.com. And this will bring you to the Emudeck Install page, so it has all of your hotkeys, all of the things that come preloaded into it, and all this fun stuff, but What we're interested in is the download link here, so just click on the download app button here, tell it to save the file. Once it is finished, you can open up the folder, and it says to drag it to the desktop. I don't know how essential that is, but you know what, why not? We will do it because that's what the instructions say, and we're going to follow them because we want to make sure everything will work correctly. But once it's on the desktop, just go ahead and run it. And it will begin the installation process for Emudeck. And then you'll eventually get a pop-up here that'll say, hey, welcome to Emudeck, do you want to use easy mode or expert mode? If you don't want to mess with any real configurations or anything like that, you can do easy mode. It'll just install everything that it needs right off the bat. But we're going to do expert mode for this tutorial because we want a little bit more control. And then it'll ask you if you want to install everything on your internal storage or your SD card. Again, I recommend SD card so you can have more storage space. Then you'll be asked if you want to install the script to convert BinQ and GDI file games into Chd format. Click yes, we'll run this script in a little bit. And then it's going to ask if you want to install Powertools. So this is that optional plugin that will allow you to change the core count for emulators like Yuzu and Dolphin. So it can make those emulators run better on the deck. I'm covering it in this tutorial, so we're going to just hit yes. And then the Deck Gyro DSU, this is for Cemu emulation, so you can actually have gamepad motion controls. So we want to install that as well. And yes, we want to update Steam ROM Manager. And yes, we want to install Emulation Station DE. Now it's going to ask us which emulators we want to install, so just go ahead and choose all the ones you want. So I want Retroarch, I want PCSX2, I want RPCS3, I want Citra, I want Dolphin, I want PPSSPP, I want Yuzu, I want Cemu, I want Cemu. I don't really need DuckStation because I use Beetle PSX hardware within Retroarch, as that's what I prefer. But yes, you can, if you do Metroid Prime Hacks, you can do Prime Hack as well. So just choose what you want, click OK. And then you could choose if you're going to use bezels and overlays. I'm not, personally. And then you can have auto-load save states when you exit games from Retroarch, so you can enable or disable this as you choose. I'm just going to choose no for now. Then it'll ask you the resolution you want for Super Nintendo. I prefer 4:3. And then by default, Emudeck puts everything into widescreen. But as you know, a number of classic systems didn't use widescreen, so it uses widescreen hacks and things like that. So I honestly prefer just to keep the original 4:3 aspect ratio. But if you want to have them in 16:9, don't check anything here. If you want to have them in 4:3, go ahead and select them here. So I'm going to select everything to leave it in 4:3, as that is what I prefer. Personal choice. But now everything will get downloaded and installed, so just sit back and wait a bit. It could take some time as it gets the entire file system up and running. And a little bit into the installation, you'll get a pop-up asking you what theme you want to use as default on Emulation Station. So I don't really care for Epic Noir or Modern. Modern's a little bit better to me, but we'll just keep it on simple for my taste. But you can change all this inside Emulation Station as well, so it's not such a big deal. And eventually your installer will get to a notice here about Yuzu not being configured and that you need your keys and firmware to go into the Yuzu keys and firmware folders within the folder structure that Emudeck has created. You want to copy just the files, not the folders, because these folders are symlinked to a different directory, so if you overwrite the folders, you will lose that symlink and Yuzu will not work correctly. Then you'll be asked if you want to set up a Retroachievements login for Retroarch. I'm going to go ahead and do so now. So just put in your Retroachievements username and password. And then it will continue the installation process. And then if you chose to install the Powertools plugin, it will ask you for the password that you set earlier for your username on Steam Deck. And then it'll give you some information about the plugin system again, about enabling the developer mode, the enable CEF remote debugging. You've already done that if you're doing the plugin setup part, so yeah. But do make note that the Powertools menu is touchscreen only. And when the installation is finally complete, you'll get some instructions on where to put your games and BIOS files. So there's going to be a ROMs folder and a BIOS folder. We're going to go over that here in just a second. And then we could use the Steam ROM manager to add them to Steam and so on and so forth. Again, we'll cover that in a minute. Just click on exit for now. Alright, so you'll see that there are now a number of new things on your desktop here. The Steam ROM manager, Emudeck Chd converter script, uninstall Emudeck. But now let's talk about getting your games and BIOS folders set up. Over on my channel, I have a playlist showing you how to back up a number of systems, BIOS files, and games if you so choose, if you happen to have a physical collection of that stuff. Otherwise, you're going to need to use Google. Don't ask me for illegal download links because I will not be giving them to you. But once you have your files sourced, you need a way to get them onto the Steam Deck. If you just went the Google route and got everything just downloaded automatically to your Steam Deck, awesome. If not, you could rely on a network transfer, or you could copy things over to a USB drive formatted that will be recognized on a Windows, Mac, and Linux PC if you don't have two Linux PCs. But what I did was actually do a network transfer, so I added a network folder, and I did it under the Windows network file share because that's the easiest for me. Because I have a RetroNAS set up, so all I have to do to access all my stuff is type in RetroNAS 3 times because that's how I set it up. It's nice and easy. So I do that. And then I can just copy it into all 3 fields because it's easy. So if you're going to be doing the network method, just get it set up for your server. And then I just need to put in my RetroNAS username and password. And that now gives me access to all of my backed up BIOS files. So for example, my Wii U keys.txt, I need that for later. As well as my keys for my Switch emulator. And my firmware. And it also gives me access to all my backed up games. So for example, my Atari 2600 games that I backed up from Atari Vault. And then I could just copy these over as needed. But thankfully, I already copied over all of my game files and BIOS files except for a couple of them here. So I don't have to do that because it takes forever. Let's go ahead and get our games placed where they need to be. So if you open up your Dolphin File Manager and scroll down to your SD card under here in Removable Devices, Primary, you'll see we have a new Emulation folder, and inside we have a BIOS folder and a ROMs folder. So this is where all of our games need to go, and you'll see that there are different folders for every system you could think of. So over on the Emudeck GitHub page, there are a number of listed file types that are supported for every system, so just make sure that your games are in one of these formats before you place them in the folders. And I'll have a link to this page in the description below, so that way you can see it. But anyway, I already have my ROMs placed correctly within these folders in a different directory. So I'm just going to open up a new instance of this. And I have a ROMs folder here that I have all those games in. So as you can see, I have my 3DO games here. They are all in Chd format. But I'm just going to cut everything out and paste it into its proper place. And I'm just going to do this with every system. Now for Wii U is when things get a little bit different. There's actually another ROMs folder within the Wii U folder because all of Cemu's files are actually in the Wii U folder. So when you're copying your Wii U games, make sure that you go into the Wii U folder, go to the second ROMs folder, and then place your Wii U games inside that one. So I also want to make note that I have my Wii U games in two different formats. I have a compressed WUD file, and then I also have extracted game files here for Twilight Princess HD and Breath of the Wild. Both work, but disk images do require that you have a special keys.txt file so that way they can be read by the emulator, but we'll go over that more in a second. And after you have all of your games placed, one optional step you could do is to run the Emudeck Chd Script. So this will look for games in your 3DO, PS1, Saturn, a number of other system folders, and convert the BinQ, GDI, or ISO files into Chd format so that way they take up less space. So if you want to convert them, just run the script and press OK, let's start. So I already ran this, so it wasn't able to find any in my folders, but just let it do its thing. It will compress the games, and you can just enjoy having improved space on your SD card. Now, just another quick note here on multi-disc games that you're going to be running in Retroarch, so anything on Sega Saturn, PlayStation, Sega CD, etc., etc. You want to make an M3U file for those specific games. That way you could do disk changes a lot easier within Retroarch. So making an M3U file is actually really easy. You just create a new text file, and you can name it whatever you want. So this is just an example, so I'm just already have one, so I don't need to name it anything else again, but then you enter the text document, and then just copy the file name of all the disks included with that game. And you just repeat this with all the disks that are part of that game. And then when it's done, you just save it. And then just rename it with a .m3u extension. And then you now have that M3U file to be a multi-disc game, so I'm just going to delete this because I don't actually need it. And once you have finished placing all of your game files, we can move on to BIOS Setup. So back out into your Emulation folder and enter the BIOS folder. So this BIOS folder is where you're going to dump all the BIOS files you need for each individual system. So we're going to start off with Retroarch here, because this is going to be your Retroarch system folder, so you just need to place BIOS files within this folder as Retroarch would expect to see them. So if you need help with specific BIOS files naming and placement, you can head over to the Retroarch website, go to their docs page, and they have a listing for all of the systems and all the BIOS information for those systems that you could click on. So for example, if we click on 3DO, it shows us a list of all the BIOS files and what they should be named. So 3DO can have a bunch of different BIOS files, but basically you just need one main system BIOS, and then some optional ones if you're running Japanese games. But then you could do that for other systems as well. So for example, we could go to Dreamcast, and it shows us that we need to have a DC folder with a DC_boot.bin file, and then if you wanted to add the Naomi BIOS files and stuff like that in there as well, you can do so. But just from the systems I cover, for example, we got Dreamcast. There's a little bit more in this folder than you would normally see because I actually have VMU save files in here already. But my DC folder, my Neo Geo CD folder, CDI folder, Atari 5200 ROM, Sega CD US ROM, Nintendo DS BIOS files and firmware file. exec.bin and grom.bin are for Intellivision. GBA BIOS. IPL.bin is actually for GameCube. I haven't gotten GameCube to do its boot animation through Steam Deck yet, so I'm not really going to cover this more specifically at the moment. Link's boot image. The MCPX underscore 1.0.bins for Xbox. We'll cover that more here in a second. But MPR, that's Sega Saturn. Panasonic 3DO. That's another Xbox one. We'll cover that in a bit. These are PS2 BIOS files. We'll cover those in a second. But then we also have PS1 BIOS files, TurboGrafx CD BIOS file, and then a sound font for DOS games. And that's all for the cores that I'm going to be running through Retroarch. So we're just going to move all of these over. And that handles all of the BIOS files for the systems I run through Retroarch. Again, if you have more systems that you're going to be running through Retroarch, this is your Retroarch system folder, so just follow the file system outlined in the docs page. And use Google or one of my provided videos on how to dump your BIOS for a specific system on how to obtain them. Now for PlayStation 2, you do need to have a PS2 BIOS for PCSX2 to run. I actually have 2 BIOS files in here for PS2. Doesn't matter, you only need one. But I have guides on the channel showing you how to back up a PS2 BIOS from a fat or slim console, so just do that or use Google once again to get your PS2 BIOS files, and then just dump them into that BIOS folder as well. Now for original Xbox, you need to dump an MCPX bin file and a BIOS file to get Xbox to run. And once you have those dumped, you could just move them into the BIOS folder. Now there is one more file we need for original Xbox to work correctly, and that is a hard disk image for the original Xbox. So there is one within the required files folder of the Cemu webpage where you could download a pre-formatted hard drive image. So this won't have a dashboard or anything on it, but that's okay. So just save the file. And once that file is finished downloading, just get it extracted. Just tell it to extract here. And then in the emulation folder, or back over on the BIOS folder, just click on the emulation folder again, go to your saves folder, find your Xemu folder, and copy the hard drive image into the save folder. And there you go. Original Xbox is mostly set up. We have to manually change some things if you have a BIOS file named differently than what it's expecting, and I'll show you that here in a bit. Let's talk about Nintendo Switch. You need prod.keys backed up and boot1 and boot0 backed up from your Switch. So go into the Yuzu folder here, and then just cut the product keys into the keys folder. And then go into the firmware folder and place your boot 0 and boot 1 in here. Remember, don't overwrite the folders because they are symlinked to another directory, and if you overwrite them, you'll destroy the symlink. And we are almost all set on the BIOS front. There is one more system that we need to do some initial setup for, and that is PlayStation 3. So to get RPCS3 up and running, we need to have the PlayStation 3 system software update downloaded onto our Steam Deck so we can install it into the emulator. So head over to PlayStation.com, PS3 system software, and download the PS3 update. Again, link will be in the description below for easier access. And for some reason, Sony stuff shows up as a security risk, so just tell it to allow the download. Alright, and once that download has finished, just go back into your emulation folder, click on the tools folder, and you'll see a launchers folder right here. So click on that, and then find RPCS3, and tell it to execute. And this will boot up the RPCS3 emulator. Click on File, Install Firmware, go to your Downloads page, and choose the PS3 update. And then it will get it all installed. So just wait for it to do its thing. And once that install's finished, you can close out of RPCS3, but I'm just going to double check that the controller is set up correctly because it has not been in previous install attempts, but it looks like we're all good to go here, so alright, cool. So just close out of that and we're all done. And now you can take the opportunity to make sure your other emulators are configured, like Xbox. Depending on how your BIOS is named, it might not be configured right off the bat, like here, for example. So you could just go up into Machine, System, thank you. And I need to change the location of my BIOS file because mine is not named like that. So I need to add it to retail 4034 bios.bin. And there we go. And now if I load it back up, I should get my Xbox boot animation and good to go. But since I didn't choose a game, it will just error because the hard drive doesn't have a dashboard. But there we go. And then we can confirm that our switch product keys are in the right place. There we go. And same with PCSX2. You confirm that the BIOS files are being seen correctly. Alright, so it is seeing the BIOS files correctly. And I don't know why it thinks this is a Japanese BIOS file. That's the file from my Slim. And this is the file from my Fat, but it says it's a Japanese one, so it's really weird, but whatever. So I'm just going to choose that. And then I can close out of PCSX2. And then for Cemu, I still need to place my keys.txt file. I forgot to do this a second ago, but it just goes in Emulation, ROMs. The Wii U folder. And then you just overwrite the original one that was in there, and you should be good to go with all of your product keys that you've added into it. Now, for anybody interested in playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you do need to have the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild update data installed into Cemu for it to work. So, source a copy of the update data. You could dump it from your own console. You could use the Wii U USB helper, but you need to just get a copy of it. I'm just going to grab mine real quick off of my RetroNAS storage. And just paste it to my desktop real quick. And once you have your Breath of the Wild update data, it needs to be in extracted format like this. And then we just need to copy it into our Breath of the Wild saves folder. So go into your ROMs folder. Find the Wii U folder, MLC01, user folder, title folder. And this is most easily done if you've already tried to run Breath of the Wild and gotten the update error. If not, you will need to manually create a folder that says 00050000. Then go inside this folder, and we need to create one more folder, and it needs to be labeled 101 capital C 9400. And then go inside that folder. And we're going to copy, and we're going to move all of the update files into that new folder. And then just bear with it while it does its thing. And once those files have finished copying, you can head back into your emulation folder, go to the tools folder, the launchers folder, launch Cemu, and then you can try launching Breath of the Wild to make sure that everything is working as intended. And if everything is working, you will be greeted by the game booting up instead of a nightmarish "this game needs a system update" message. Now, just one more thing to note for those of you interested in Wii U emulation on the Steam Deck and tried to install the Steam Deck Gyro DSU plugin through Emudeck Installer. I noticed that mine didn't actually work as intended. It did not actually install the service correctly, so I had to come to the Steam Deck Gyro DSU GitHub page. Scroll down to the install command here, copy it, open up a console window, and then paste it in, and then run it. And it'll ask you for that password you set earlier for root access once it starts going. So just enter that when prompted. And then it'll ask you to restart your Steam Deck after you get that installed, so just go ahead and restart it. And once that reboot's finished, just go ahead and go back to the desktop mode. And we don't need to have that open. But next, we need to grab Cemuhook for our version of Cemu installed with Emudeck. So as always, links to all this will be in the description below for you to easily grab. But we're looking for the version for 1.26.2, so just grab this one right here and tell it to save. And then from here, head into your downloads folder, find the Cemuhook that you just downloaded, get it extracted, then head into your ROMs folder and navigate to your Wii U folder. And then copy the extracted files into your Cemu folder. There we go. Now just head back out to the emulation folder, go into Tools, Launchers, and launch Cemu. And if everything is running and detected properly, under Options, you'll see a new gamepad motion source, DSU1, and you want to select by slot. And then under Input Settings, you want to change your default profile from Deck to Deck Gamepad Gyro. And just load it. And then you can close it. And then you can test if everything is working as intended by opening up a game you know has motion controls. And then you can just do an action that requires gyro support. So, unfortunately on my Steam Deck, even after installing the service, it doesn't seem to work quite as intended. It's pretty dang janky. Like, it doesn't work right for me. So I'm hoping that you all have better luck than I did. So I mean, it is working, it's just not very good compared to what I've seen in other people's videos. So, oh well, I'll wait for the next update and see if that helps me out. Now, one more thing I'd like to make note of is in Retroarch. Let's go ahead and open this up real quick. So the Emudeck installer downloads a crap ton of Retroarch cores by default, but one it did not download was for the same CDI core. So my CDI games will not work because that core isn't downloaded. So I could just head into Retroarch's online updater, scroll down to the piece here for Philips, and I could download same CDI, so that way I get that functionality. And then you could add any other emulation core in here if so desired. You could also use it to update the installed cores if needed. But once you have that downloaded, you can just quit out of Retroarch as well. And with that, you should be good to go to start running the Steam ROM manager to get everything added in. So just close out of that file system. Now for this next part, we do need to close out of Steam because the Steam ROM manager does get messed up if Steam is running. So just right click on Steam, exit Steam. And if you were using a specific controller profile for your Steam Deck for this part, it's going to change back over to the system level input at this point. So we are going to lose virtual keyboard support, but our right trackpad is still going to be the mouse, our right trigger is going to be left click, and our left trigger is going to be right click. A little backwards there, as you can tell. But just open up Steam ROM Manager. And then we can make this full screen. And over here on the left, you'll see that you can expand this tab here, so just go ahead and do that. And you'll see this section here that says parsers. So anything here that is enabled will show up in its own individual section in Steam. So if you just want to have an emulation station entry, you could turn off all of the other ones and just leave on emulation station. which is mostly what I prefer to do. All these systems show up with an emulation station. You can scrape for game title database stuff. So it's a really nice clean look, and it keeps your Steam homepage looking a lot cleaner as well. There is one exception to this, however, and that is PS3 games. RPCS3 is not implemented into Emulation Station by default. There are some workarounds to make it so it can be, but I'm not going to be covering those today. So instead, we're going to use the parser to keep our PS3 games visible within SteamOS itself. So my PS3 games are in extracted ISO PSN format, but it also works if they are installed packages. So I'm just going to disable everything but RPCS3 and Emulation Station, just because I think it looks cleaner that way. But once I have that selected, I'm just going to hit save. And again, if you want to have other systems show up, just leave these on. But once you have the system set the way you want it, head up here to the top and click on Preview. And then tell it to generate an app list. And then it will download some box arts for everything here in just a second, so just be patient with it. My Wi-Fi connection is pretty far away, so it's taking its sweet time. There we go. So now you could choose which banners show up on your Steam Deck. So I like setting my Emulation Station one to Emudeck. I think it looks nice. But then you could just set the banners here for each one. Didn't find one for Resistance, that's funny. But then you could also choose the poster page that shows up, because it's going to be different depending on the position in your last played list. So if you just played a game, it'll be the grid one. That'll show up as the primary image. Otherwise, it'll be the poster one, so then you can just choose which poster you want to have show up. So something like that. But once you have everything set the way you want it to, just save the app list. And then you can just close out of that and reboot into Steam. And inside the Library tab, you'll see that there is now a new emulation collection here. Somewhere. There we go. So Emulation Station is now showing up here. And because I kept my PS3 games checked, there will now be a PlayStation 3 playlist here as well. So right here. And that has all my PS3 games in there too. But with that, we're finished with everything on the desktop side of the Steam Deck. So we could just reboot back into gaming mode and enjoy the spoils of our labor. And once your Steam Deck is finished rebooting into SteamOS, you could just head down to your library. You can go to the collections page and find the emulation subcategory or PlayStation 3 subcategory if you want to start playing those games. Or you can find them in the non-Steam section as well. I have a bunch of stuff in here from other computers. I'm kind of annoyed that Steam makes these universal now, but whatever. So I'm just going to start off by going into Emudeck and hit play. Oh, and it has to re-download all my Proton runtimes and stuff because I had factory reset to get the plugins to work. So just wait for it to do its thing if it needs to. Alright, but then it should boot you up into Emulation Station, where you can then see all of your various systems that you have put games into their folders for. If you don't like this theme, you could just press Start, head to the UI settings, theme set. Let's just change this back to simple because I just think it looks a heck of a lot nicer. And that way we could just see a nice overview of everything that we have ready to go here. So make sure all of your systems are showing up as intended. Again, Wii U might not be showing up right if you didn't put it into that separate subfolder. But we have everything here good to go. But you could then just go into a system, press A on a game, and it should launch it right up. And if you set up that Retroachievements account, you're good to go there as well. But you can just go through your various systems and make sure everything is working as intended. So, for example, I could try to load up Wind Waker, and if my keys.txt file was detected right, that game should boot right up. And sure enough, here we are. But there you go. How about some awesome Wii U emulation in an actual handheld? Who needs a Wind Waker HD port for Switch? But another thing you might be interested in doing within Emulation Station itself is setting the emulators that are used for each core. So by default, they're set up just to run and run well for every user, but I prefer to use more accuracy-based emulators than some of the ones that it gives. And some emulators I just don't like. Like, I don't like MAME, so I'm going to change this over to Final Burn Neo. I prefer that. Stella's good, Atari 5200's good, Atari Lynx, I'm going to change that over to Beetle Lynx. DOS, make sure that's set to DOSBox Pure because that's the best DOSBox implementation I've ever seen. PC Engine, Super Graphics, TG16. Citra, I'm going to change this over to standalone Citra instead of the Retroarch version. Boopit 64 plus Nex, yes. Melon DS, yes. Messin, yes. For Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I like to use Same Boy. Dolphin, make sure GC standalone selected. SNES, I prefer BSNES. Yuzu, Dolphin standalone. Same CDI, this is selected, good. Dreamcast. Game Gear, Master System, Genesis, Saturn. PlayStation, I like to change this over to Beetle PSX hardware. If you install DuckStation, you can set it to DuckStation standalone, PCSX2 standalone, PPSSPP, change that over to standalone, and there we go. And now by default, you just get these game lists that are just set up like this. But if you'd prefer to make that look a little bit nicer, you could head into the scraper menu here. And go into other settings first, because you might want to change this off of Europe if you're not in Europe. So for example, I want US stuff to be prioritized. You can choose systems that you want to scrape data for. And this process can take a while, so I'm just going to do 3DO here just as an example. And I'm going to tell it to start, and it will go through my 3DO games list and apply data to them if it finds it. And since I'm further away from my Wi-Fi, this will take even longer. If it can't find game data for your specific game, you could try renaming the ROM file to closer match the title. I know some of my Atari 2600 games are named very obscurely and it can't find the data for them. And it told me that everything is now complete, but as you can see, it didn't find anything for Need for Speed because the game is actually titled Road and Tracks: The Need for Speed, so it just doesn't know how to look for it there. And it also didn't find anything for Super Street Fighter 2. Not so sure why it couldn't find that one since it's Super Street Fighter 2 Arcade Edition, but whatever. Now when you go in, you can see that you have nice descriptions, player counts, and even a brief demo video showing you how the game plays. So overall, very cool feature. But for basic Emulation Station setup, you are now good to go. You can enjoy any of the systems that you have configured to run within it, and everything should be working really nicely. Now, one more quick note that you all might be interested in. If you press the Steam button on your Steam Deck, you can head over to the controller setting, or not, because it's angry. Okay. And you can view the templates, and they have a template for Cemu, Citra, and then you can customize any controller layouts you want for any specific emulator, just based off the default settings. You don't need to mess with it within the emulator itself. Can be handy, up to you if you want to use it or not. And now for a quick demonstration on how Powertools can help you with your GameCube emulation. You can see that the CPU clock speed kind of fluctuates all over the place. We want to keep it at that 3.5 gigahertz range for the games to run at full speed, even more demanding games like Rogue Squadron 2. So right here it is maintaining that speed as it should, but it doesn't always happen that way. So if we click on the Steam button, A couple of things that we could do if we go down to the performance bar here. So we can turn on manual GPU clock control, keep it at 1600 megahertz here. Make sure performance frame limiter is still set to 60, because if you put that down to 30, you're going to get lag. But with Powertools, this is all touchscreen here, so we could turn that on, and we can reduce this down to 4 threads, not 3. We want 4. There we go. And that is only on touch control. But now we only have 4 threads, and they're able to maintain the higher clock speeds more frequently than before. And as a result, Rogue Squadron 2 will not lag as much. But after you've set this, you could just entire thing there. But as you can see, we're able to maintain faster CPU speeds because less threads are being used. And as a result, Rogue Squadron 2, in its most demanding level, is very, very playable. Couple minor frame dips here and there, but nothing super major. It's actually really impressive. And that same 4 CPU setting is also very useful for Yuzu to get it to be more playable. Like even this part in Skyward Sword with all the threads enabled is a bit more laggy, but now it is nice and smooth. And at times you might need to make sure that the manual GPU clock is still on, otherwise it just might dip. Just again helps us to level out some of the smoothness. And when you're done playing Dolphin, you could just go back into Powertools and set the cores back up to the full 8 for any of your other emulators or Steam Deck games. You don't really need to worry about anything else. Just change it back up to 8. Good to go. And then for PS3 games, all you need to do is go to your PlayStation 3 collection and then just choose a game and it will boot up into RPCS3. But there we go, PS3 emulation up and running on the Steam Deck. As you can tell, it's not the smoothest experience on PS3 games just because they're much more demanding. The emulator's still technically in its infancy. But it's pretty awesome to see, especially considering this is a handheld PC. And there's other games that will run full speed, which is just pretty freaking cool. But that is going to do it as far as Emudeck setup is concerned. Getting the plugins to work is a bit of an optional step, but definitely worthwhile. And then the Emudeck setup process itself is fairly straightforward. Install the program, get your games and BIOS files placed. I mean, there are some little extra things that are a bit more difficult, like getting the Breath of the Wild update data installed. But overall, not a hard project to do with your Steam Deck, and one that definitely gives it a crap ton more functionality. And I have to say, it all runs really well for the most part. I mean, PS3 is going to have some performance issues because it's a PS3 emulator. It's only got about 60% game compatibility as it is, but the fact that it works at all and is working as well as it is on a handheld computer is pretty impressive. But thank you all so much for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you have found it informative and it helps you get your emulation project set up on the Steam Deck. If you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a couple huge favors here at the end. If you haven't done so already, please hit that like or dislike button, depending on how much you like this tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, hit that sub button, notification bell, so you can see when new videos go live on the channel. I'm going to be covering some more Steam Deck emulation stuff in the coming weeks, as there are certain settings for the emulation that comes with the default Emudeck install that I'm not the biggest fan of, and I'm going to mess around and configure those differently. If you're interested in further helping support the channel, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing this content to you. Big shout out to all of our current backers, y'all are amazing. Thank you for being our champions and believe in what we do here. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.